My name is Mike Nelson. As I was introduced, I'm the Vice President of IoT Security at DigiCert. DigiCert is the world's largest certificate authority. A couple years ago, DigiCert bought the website security business from Symantec, a company that has a little bit more of a known brand. We're proud of that. We've quickly become the world's largest, and we are a global company. Every day on the internet, we secure about 26 billion connections. In the IoT space, an area where I'm a little bit more proud of, we've provisioned certificates for authentication and encryption to over 2 billion IoT devices. We're the world's largest certificate authority in IoT as well. We're proud of that. We represent a lot of large consortiums, even in Europe, CI+, smart TVs. If you have a smart TV in your home, they're using a digital certificate from DigiCert to authenticate and secure the content that's coming to and from your TV. Cable Labs, another one, set-top boxes, that's an industry group that represents over 500 manufacturers of cable set-top boxes. Our certificates are used for securing all of those connections. So if you have a set-top box in your home, likely you're using a DigiCert certificate for that. So I'm going to jump into that and talk a little bit more about PKI later, but I'm asked all the time, what is the current state of IoT security, and people have been talking about it today, and I think this video captures it quite well. You see the gentleman, he's feeling relatively confident, he gets out of his saddle, he kind of stretches his back, and before he knows it, he loses control and he's face down on the pavement. I had an incident earlier this year in April. I was actually riding my road bike with a bunch of friends, and we were going downhill at about 37 miles an hour, and I had a malfunction in the rear wheel of my bike. One of the spokes popped and came up to my brake system, which caused me to endo, which means go over the handlebars. At 35 miles an hour, it came down directly on my head. As you can see, my helmet was cracked. The foam part of my helmet was cracked right down the middle. I walked away from this incident. Miraculously, I was very fortunate. If I rewind the clock 6 months before that, I was actually in a bike shop. And I was talking to this guy, and I was trying to buy a new helmet. The guy said to me, well, there's a $60 helmet and there's a $300 helmet. And I was like, they look the same. Which helmet should I get? And the guy said, well, if you have a $60 head, a $60 helmet. You have a $300 head, get a $300 helmet. I was like, all right, I'll get the $60 helmet. Just kidding. I bought the $300 helmet. And it's really not, I don't emphasize this because of the cost of the helmet, but because of the asset that I was trying to protect. In cybersecurity, it's all about protecting our assets. What's most critical to your business and the operations of your business? To me, if I break my finger, or if I break a toe or a leg, I can survive from that. But if I damage my head, that's a career-limiting event for me, something that can be catastrophic. If you look at the helmet, it's really interesting. The difference between the $300 helmet and the $60 helmet is there's actually carbon fiber woven through the foam of the helmet. And as I looked at my helmet, you can kind of see it here. There's a yellow speck right there. That's the carbon fiber. The foam of my helmet was obliterated, just split right in half. And if foam was the only thing that I was using, I would have had a severe concussion that day. But the carbon fiber that had been woven into that protected my head and allowed me to be here today speaking, which I'm grateful for. The interesting thing about that incident as well, as I've reflected on it, is that I am so glad that I made the decision then to protect what happened 6 months later. And the problem that we see today is that a lot of organizations are not making that decision. They're not doing the right things today to protect their assets for when they get breached. And I'll tell you, when my spoke popped, I did not have time to rush to the bike shop, upgrade my helmet, and put it on my head. I had to do the right thing at that time to plan for that event. Similar, when cyber breaches happen, if any of you have been involved in them or have been part of them, do they happen quickly? Yeah. Ask those who were infected by WannaCry how quickly that spread. And if they had time to go upgrade their security and do the right things at that point. You don't. You have to do the right things today. DigiCert, last year we did a survey, a global survey, where we surveyed about 1,000 organizations about the current state of IoT. 84% of the respondents said security is a big concern for their organization as they onboard more and more IoT devices. IoT is growing, we know, for a lot of different reasons, but of note, our survey identified 3 main growth factors for IoT, which I think are really interesting. Operational efficiency, enhancing the customer service experience, and growing revenue. And this is where I think it starts to get really interesting. 8 in 10 of them said they're concerned, but this is where it starts to get really interesting to me. Of all of the respondents, it became clear that there were what we call top-tier organizations and bottom-tier organizations. The top tier demonstrated mastery of basic cybersecurity best practices. Things like authentication and encryption, risk assessment, penetration testing. They were good at those things, and they clearly knew what they were doing. The bottom tier struggled. And if you look at the difference in, 100% of the bottom tier had experienced a cyber incident in the last year. 100%. You look at the types of attacks that they were experiencing, the bottom tier compared to the top tier, showing that the organizations that were mastering security, it's working and it's protecting them. They have the right helmet on and it's protecting them from the attacks that are going on. Another one, the average yearly cost of damages from these incidents was approximately $384,000. Some reported, there were 10% that reported damages north of 30 million over 2 years, just to show how extensive and damaging the cyber incidents were for large organizations. But again, you see the difference between the top tier, only 14% experienced loss of productivity compared to 60% of the bottom tier. The difference between those who are working to master good cybersecurity and those who are struggling, the damages to those bottom tier organizations was shocking from the result. And I share that with you because of how interesting it was. We asked the top tier, what are the things that you are doing that you believe is causing the greatest impact on those outcomes? And these were the 5 things that they listed. Encryption of all sensitive data, data integrity, ensuring that when we're transmitting data, there's integrity associated with it. I thought this was interesting. Scalability of their security solutions. Large organizations need scalable solutions. Doing over-the-air updates, making sure that they can't be intercepted, that they're secure. And then key storage, making sure that they're handling keys in a secure way. Interesting enough, so when I'm asked what are good fundamentals of IoT, this is my list, not from the survey, I would say these are things that are not, you cannot compromise on these. If you trust an unauthenticated connection, you're setting yourself up for failure. There have been a lot of people who've talked about the Jeep Cherokee and St. Jude pacemaker. Those are authentication issues. Charlie Miller was able to hack into that Jeep Cherokee because the infotainment system wasn't looking for credentials. It allowed him to get right in, and then it also allowed him to upload software into the car without checking for a signature to make sure it was coming from a trusted source and that it was not malicious. So never run unsigned code. The Jeep didn't look for that. The pacemaker at St. Jude, it also allowed them to embed malware on the device that sat next to the bedside, which then allowed them to control the pacemaker. Never trust unsigned data. So if you're receiving data, I'm a type 1 diabetic. Right before I got here, I looked at my, before I got up, I looked to make sure my blood sugar was okay. I don't know if any of you use IoT in your daily life, but I do every 5 minutes. I get alerts on my phones to tell me where my diabetes is. If the data that's coming to my phone is not signed or it's not, integrity is not assured, a man-in-the-middle attack could happen. Someone can manipulate those numbers and they can tell me my blood sugar is 400 instead of 100. And I dose myself insulin and I could end up in the hospital. So making sure that data has integrity through the use of digital signatures is a critical component. And then encryption, of course. I say encryption always. Of course, encryption of sensitive data is critical. And this is where public key infrastructure comes in. I believe public key infrastructure is a security approach that most people are vaguely familiar with. They know that it's that it works. It's been around securing the internet for decades, and it continues to get better, and it evolves. And today it works, and it's continuing to work. In IoT, when most people think about PKI, they think about web servers and they think about browsers. With IoT, it's actually a little bit different. With IoT, public trust is not needed. And public trust is what is used between a web browser and a server. So when you get online, those are public certificates that are being used. Public certificates have a heavy requirement for things like validity periods. You can only now, recent change, 2-year validity periods. There's also heavy validation that's required from companies like DigiCert to go and do that. With IoT, public trust is not needed in 99% of the deployments. We use private trust, which brings much more flexibility to the certificate and the profile and the things that we do with that certificate. For example, we can have more flexible validity periods. So we have some certificates that have seconds, validity periods that are just seconds, and they renew every few seconds. We have validity periods for some devices that sit and are never touched that are a decade, even sometimes longer than that. And so depending on the need and what the device is going to be doing, there's flexibility around how you can do that. And so I just wanted to dispel that misconception, because a lot of people come up and they say, well, how can you put a $200 public certificate on a $15 IoT device? That just doesn't work. And with private trust, there's much more flexibility, there's much more scalability. As I said, we've issued over 2 billion IoT certificates. And the price of those certificates comes down dramatically, of course, with scale, so that it meets that, it fits into that economic model. But the same technology is used between web servers and browsers as with IoT devices and whatever they're connecting to, whether that's a mobile app or whether that's a server or whether that's another device. The authentication that's needed, anything your device connects to needs to be properly authenticated, and digital certificates and PKI can be used to provide that mutual authentication. Encryption. Once that authentication occurs, the encrypted tunnel opens up and data is able to pass through an encrypted tunnel to make sure that it's handled in a confidential way. And then using digital signatures, things like code signing, to make sure that there's integrity with those packages, so that when it arrives, you know that it has not been tampered with. And PKI delivers on those 3 core features. With PKI, I like to say, we see a lot of organizations who go thinking PKI is just the technology, and they go stand up these PKIs, and then they start to run into problems because they don't think about the broader picture of PKI, which is more about what this says. PKI is much more than just technology. It's the framework that contains a set of roles, policies, and procedures needed to manage, distribute, create, store, use, and revoke digital certificates. If you don't think through all of those things when you're standing up your PKI, you're setting yourself up for failure. You need to know, how are we going to get a certificate from point A to point B? How will we get it down to the device? When are we going to revoke? What's the validity period of these certificates? You need to answer and define those things before you stand up a public key infrastructure. This is common sense for, I'm sure, a lot of you, but we still get questions about it. But PKI works like this. It's quite a simple process, but it's a mutual authentication because whenever the device is connecting to and the device both contain certificates. And when the connection occurs, a few things happen. First, the device and the server, let's say, that it's connecting to, checks to make sure that the certificate is signed by a trusted root. Roots of trust in PKI are very important. If the certificate has been signed by that trusted root, it checks that box and it moves to the next one to make sure that it's been signed by a trusted intermediate, which is an issuing certificate authority. The ICAs, or intermediate CAs, are what issues the end entity certificates that go down to the devices. If it passes that and then moves to the next one to check the validity period to make sure that the certificate is still valid, it then passes that and then it checks the revocation to make sure that that certificate has not been revoked. If all of those things clear and pass, the connection is authenticated and it's allowed to go. If it doesn't, the connection is terminated. PKI and the use of certificates in situations like this is the best way to keep the bad actors out. It's a simple approach that works. Again, just in wrapping up, a few complexities that we see organizations run into problems with. One of them is their root hierarchy. So we have organizations come and say, should we have one root or should we have multiple roots? We have 30 different business units. Should we have one root for every business unit, or should we have one root at the top and then use intermediates for the different business units? That's a key consideration that every organization, when you're standing up a PKI, should think through. More commonly, we see more and more organizations doing multi-root deployments and then multi-intermediates underneath those roots. But the hierarchy of your PKI is very important to make sure when you're standing it up, it's stood up to be able to scale. We have a lot of big organizations who come to us and say, we want to sell businesses off. So, we have an optical division, and we have a diabetes division. We buy and sell those types of businesses all the time. How can we do that without disrupting our PKI? We don't want to sell off a business that then is going to cause problems with our root of trust. So you want to make sure you think through those types of things as you're standing up your PKI to make sure that you're set up for long-term success. Validity periods, again, that's an important component. Secure storage of the private keys. It seems funny that I'm still talking about this at security conferences, but I still shockingly see organizations that are very mature in their security approaches still doing horrific things with their private keys. Never go down that path. Certificate provisioning, and I would say this is the biggest challenge we see organizations try to solve. And DigiCert has actually come up with a handful of very innovative ways to help manufacturers solve this. You can get a certificate. A certificate is very easy to get, but how do you get that to your device? And we have the ability to provision certificates to the silicon. If you're a manufacturer, you can order your silicon and the chip that's going to go into the device, and it can come preloaded with a digital certificate that allows you to have authentication before it even gets to your manufacturing line. Manufacturers who have manufacturing lines in China and other places where they don't want connections to the internet love that solution. We also have the ability to provision certificates at the point of manufacturing through the use of on-premise type services. And then, of course, cloud-based provisioning. Through mechanisms like REST or SCEP and EST, which are provisioning protocols, we can also provision through our API using protocols like that to get certificates down to devices that are out in the field. Certificate management systems, of course, when organizations used to manage 1,000 certificates, that was manageable. We see many organizations now managing millions, if not tens of millions, some hundreds of millions. So having automated processes to renew, to revoke, have the ability to manage that wide array of certificates is very, very important with IoT. As those deployments grow in size, management becomes very critical. And then I talked about governance. Your certificate policy and practice statement are where you dictate and you articulate your governance policies and practices, and it's important to do those things before you get it right, before you deploy and stand that up. In summary, I think best practices for IoT security: build it into your life cycle. Make it part of the DNA of the things that you're doing. Understand the risk of your devices. Those things don't involve PKI, but are very important things to do. Authenticate every connection. Encrypt sensitive data. And then finally, use digital signatures and code signing to ensure the integrity of data coming to and from your device. I believe that if manufacturers were to do those simple things, it would dramatically reduce the number of exploits that we're seeing. Most of the exploits that we see are challenges with authentication. Devices not requiring credentials for access. And that is a key oversight and something that needs to be addressed. That is it. We're happy. We've got a booth out in the foyer. We'd be happy to take questions, but thank you so much for your time today.